Yes, I wasn't here. Okay, so has anyone here ever configured an SPF record? Does anyone know how SPF record works? Okay, so SPF records are just basically DNS text entries which are understood by mail servers. So when a mail is obtained by a mail server, it checks on the DNS record whether the mail is genuine or not. So SPF is basically just an entry saying whatever comes from this IP address is intended to send email for this domain. That's that. It wasn't, of course, enough because it only protected the envelope from header in emails. So an extension, which is DMARC, was later developed to allow to protect also the from header and to tell the server what to do if an email didn't pass the checks. This is an example of an SPF record. It basically tells, this is SPF. A stands for the A DNS record. So anything that comes from here is allowed to send email as domain.com, for example. Then there is an IP range. Then there is an include call, and then the -all tells whatever else that didn't match any rule before this can be discarded. The include part is very interesting because it's a recursive call. So it doesn't just include anything that resolves for foo.com. It includes anything that is allowed to send emails instead of foo.com. It can recur up to 10 times. So SPF records can become really big to resolve. And there are other ways other than SPF to check if an email is authentic. The only one is DKIM, which is almost never used, gives a lot of false negatives. And there was a talk in late October last year that proved that many implementations of that protocol are broken, so you cannot really trust it. So SPF has a big problem. It was invented in late 2004, maybe 6. It became something that people knew and talked about. In 2014, became a standard. Problem is, in 2014, we already had cloud sharing. And SPF strongly relies on the fact that if you own an external IP address and you send emails from there, only you can send emails from there, which is completely wrong. So currently anyone that shares the same IP as your mail server can send an email in your name, and there is no way to your mail server or any other mail server to detect that, because SPF fails in that case. But let's say you're not using your own cloud sharing, or you're using an external email service provider, like, for example, Office 365. In October, I found a way to bypass SPF protection in Office 365 based on the fact that they had 300,000 allowed EPs to send emails as anyone in the Active Directory of any domain which was subscribed to Microsoft. So 30 of them were left over, and when they repurposed them, they moved them to Azure, probably because they need it, because Azure is always expanding, but they forgot to remove them from their SPF record. So anyone that was able to buy a cluster in the Europe West region for Azure was able to send email instead of anyone subscribed to Office 365, including my company. So that was a problem. Everything was about the cloud. So what if you don't use any cloud services? Well, that's still an issue, because let's say you use an external survey campaign services like MailChimp, SparkPost, or any of such. They don't want their emails to be flagged as spam by accident. So their SPF records are really really badly implemented, and the tilde all at the end says, basically, if you get this and you think it's spam, It might not be, so please don't just assume it's bad, which does not provide, it does not provide any protection. So, and there's more, because those services are using cloud services. So when you include them, you are including every single IP address in AWS, GCP, or Azure, depending on what they decide to use and to trust. Up to this point, I was like, well, let's assume SPF just doesn't work. How can we protect ourselves anyways? We can't do much, spoiler. You can avoid anything that shares IP addresses. So you can either own your own mail server, or you have to make sure your IP address is not shared with anything else that can send emails. Or you can use different domains. So if you plan to do email campaigns using an external service, use a subdomain. In this example, instead of using yourdomain.com, use info.yourdomain.com, so you can use different DNS records and include whatever you want, because from there, someone cannot send an email in your stead. Let's say you are admin at domain.com. You don't want anyone using AWS to send an email in your name, so you use info.domain.com to include their SPF record. So you protect basically anyone else in your domain. But there is still a problem. That is what you should do if you are in the defense part on the owner of the domain. What if you receive an email that looks suspicious but passed all the SPF checks and maybe also the DMARC rules were checked? How do you know if the email is genuine or not? And in this case, there are two surprises. The first one, you need to look at email headers, so you have to look into the source of the email and see the first time the email was received by a server. Look at the IP address, and if the IP was included by accident, for example, you receive an email by admin at domain.com, but the outgoing IP address is included because MailChimp SPF record was included, that's likely to be a scam. And if you cannot do that because the email you got comes from the IP you expect it to come from, there is a simple way to check if a service is sharing its IP address with several others, which is to use Bing. You resolve the domain, you get the IP address from that domain, and you Bing with IP colon the IP you just got. If in the result you have several domains, it's very likely it's using a cloud-based sharing service. So someone might have compromised one of the websites that are running there and got a remote code execution and decided to, instead of pwning a maybe not interesting website, to send email in your stead to all your clients or everyone using your service. So in that case, Bing comes handy. And that was basically it. Any question? Okay, then thanks.